If you'd like to follow along with this lesson, open the Colors, Gradients, Pattern, Effects Illustrator file from the Chapter 2 subfolder of the Project Files folder located on your desktop. For this lesson, the panels that you'll need to have open are the Color panel, the Swatches panel, the Gradients panel, Pattern Options, and the Appearance panel. Let's talk a little bit about color. There's two primary modes in Illustrator to work with color. There's CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black is what the CMYK stands for, and that is when your document is intended for print. RGB would be our other color mode, and that's when your document is intended for web. Our document here is CMYK. You may notice there's a color panel available. You could use the color panel to mix your own colors. You could also use the Swatches panel, or you could use the Adobe Color Picker. There are a lot of different ways to get color while working in Illustrator. Now here's what you want to be mindful of. Before you start working with color or creating a new color, we'll notice here that our object isn't selected. That means that if we create a color, it won't automatically apply to anything. We'll need to save it. If we'd like it to automatically apply, what we need to do is select our object first. Because our paw print is made up of 4 different paths, let's take our selection tool and drag a marquee around the whole thing to select it. Now, because the paw print is black and white, here's something that you want to probably keep your eye on. Notice what just happened to our color panel. All of a sudden, our CMYK sliders are gone. Let's change that before we go any further. Let's go here to the panel menu, click, and let's choose CMYK again. Alright, now we have our CMYK color sliders back, just in case we need those. Now, again, when we create a new color, because our paw print is selected, it will actually change the color of the paw print. Now, if we want to change the fill color, we'll make sure that this little box right here is on top. If we wanted to add a stroke or change the color of a stroke if we had one, we'd make sure that this box here was on top. Let's work with a fill color first. Now, to get to the Adobe Color Picker, all you have to do is double-click here on the fill box, and this will open the Adobe Color Picker. After that, you'll probably want to pull this middle slider up or down to find the color ranges that you're looking for. If we go all the way up into the reds, let's find a nice deep red color by clicking over to the left. Notice that wherever we click, the color shows up here. Now to get a deep red, we'll go right down here. That looks good. And also, before we go, notice this. If we were working with RGB, this is the number for the red, green, blue that we would need. This is the hexadecimal number. Over to the right of that, you'll see the CMYK values, and these are actually percentages of ink. To reproduce the color that we have selected, the printer would need 46% cyan, 88% magenta, 66% yellow, and 67% black. If we're happy with this color, we just simply click OK. Notice the fill color is now indicative of the color that we just selected, and also our selected object is that color as well. Now, if we would like to use this color again, we need to put it over in our Swatches panel so we can get to it a lot easier next time. To do that, we can click right here on the fill color box and drag it and drop it over into the Swatches panel, and now we can use it again and again. Alright, so creating a color swatch from the Adobe Color Picker, pretty easy. Let's deselect our object, and now why don't we create another object and learn how to create a color from the Swatches panel. Let's go grab our rectangle tool and just draw a basic rectangle. Now if we hold down the Shift key, we'll get a perfect square. Alright, our rectangle is automatically filled with the same color that we used last time, because if you look here, that's the active color fill. Alright, well, we've seen how to use the Adobe Color Picker. Now let's talk about adding a color from the Swatches panel. With your object selected, and again you're going to make sure the fill box is on top, if you wanted to choose another color from here, you just simply click and your selected object is then filled with that color. You may notice that as we select colors, the color panel right here shows you the respective color values. You can tweak or adjust any of these colors at any time. Let's drag the black slider over a little bit to get a darker shade of the aqua. Very nice. Alright, well, what if we wanted to add a stroke? Well, what you need to do is make sure the stroke box is on the top, and then just like before, you could double click here to get the Adobe color picker. You could actually use the color panel, or you could use the swatches panel. Let's click here to add a brown stroke to our selected object. Now, by default, strokes are 1 point. What if you needed a thicker stroke? Well, you can do that. Let's look right up here at the control panel, and if we click this up arrow key a couple of times, notice that the point size gets larger every time we click. If you want more control or perhaps a custom stroke, click this little link over to the left that says stroke. This will temporarily open the stroke panel, and you could customize your stroke. You could even customize the corner points. Let's click this guy here in the middle to round our corner points. That looks nice. We'll just hit the escape key on our keyboard, grab our selection tool, and let's deselect our object. Alright, so we've looked at the Adobe color picker, we've looked at the color panel, and the swatches panel. Let's look at one other place that's a great resource for color, and that's this little icon right down in the lower left hand corner of the swatches panel. If we click here, we'll see some swatch libraries that are just awesome, especially if you're in a quick hurry and you need to find colors that match or perhaps a color scheme like skin tones. If we go here to skin tones, we are going to see an additional swatches panel open that's full of skin tone selections that we can use. Let's expand this panel just a little bit, and then we'll take a look. When you look at the skin tones, you'll probably see colors that you'd like to add to your swatches panel. To do that, you can simply click on the color swatch itself that you want to grab, or you can get the entire set by clicking one time on this folder. Clicking on the folder will automatically add the skin tones that we selected to our swatches panel, and then we can close this guy up. Alright, so we've talked about swatches and we've talked about color. Let's talk a little bit about gradients. Let's start by creating a new object. Maybe we'll go with a rectangle again. And it picked up the same stroke and fill as that we used the time before. Well, don't forget about the appearance panel. This is where you can change the stroke and the color of any selected object. So let's click this icon for a new stroke. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. Let me undo that real quick. With our object still selected, let's just bump down the stroke weight. That's very easy to do. Just select the stroke in the appearance panel and click this arrow right here. And now we have a 1 point stroke. Well, let's talk about gradients. Gradients are also housed in the swatches panel. By default, we get one radial gradient, the super soft black vignette, and 3 linear gradients, which you can see at the end of the row above this one. Now, if we select this gradient now, the gradient really won't be applied where we need it to be applied, because if we look over here, we're going to see the stroke box is on top of the fill. Let's put the fill color on, and now let's select the vignette. Alright, well, what if we want to create our own gradient? We can do that as well. If your gradient panel isn't open, you might want to open it, and you can find that underneath the window menu at the top. Mine is open, and it's docked right here to the left of the color panel, so I'll go here. Now, Illustrator gives us a couple of different kinds of gradients, only 2 really. We get a linear gradient, which means from side to side, or a radial gradient, and that's what you see that we have already. Well, we want to create a new colorful gradient. Let's maybe choose linear. Because we had our object selected, it said, oh, okay, well, do you want to change your gradient to linear? And that's fine for now. But what we really want to do is make a colorful gradient. Let's take a look at this little slider right here, this gradient slider. These little guys here, these are color stops, and you can have as many as you want. Now we're going to just take this one here and drag it over to the left, and maybe this one and drag it in the middle, and this one can stay over to the right. And now let's change our colors. Let's double click here on the left color stop. This is where we'll be able to determine what color we want this color stop to be. We can create our own color here, or we can go to the swatches panel and choose any color that we have available already in our swatches panel. Let's maybe choose this color blue for the left color stop. Let's maybe choose another color for the middle color stop. We'll double click here and maybe choose red, and then something a little bit more creative for this guy here, maybe a green. And now we have a multicolored gradient. You may be asking, well, why is it so light? Well, each one of these color stops has an opacity setting. We're over here on the right color stop, and notice the opacity setting is 95%. That means it's going to be a little bit see-through, right? So why don't we make this full color by choosing 100? And while we're here, why don't we make the other ones 100% also? Let's select the color stop in the middle, and we can choose an opacity setting of 100 for here. And why don't we go all the way over to the left color stop as well, and opacity needs to be 100 as well. And when we're finished, we can see our multicolored linear gradient. If we'd like to save that gradient, we'll simply click here from the gradient panel and drag it and drop it down into the swatches panel. And now we can use it again. Alright, so now we've learned how to create solid color and gradients